So maybe you've never heard the name Ayron Jones before, but that is a damn shame. And it ends tonight because he is our guest this evening on Loudwire Nights. Welcome, Ayron. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, Tori, thanks for having me.
Always, always. So, do you consider yourself a vocalist or a guitarist first? Because you excel at
Uh,
both. I mean, you have a couple of very real gifts. Which one is like your deeper love?
I would say guitar is my deeper, my first love, and the voice kind of followed because I grew up in the church and listening to music and learning music in the church originally. So there was a very strict regimen of getting your voice up there, and I was always made fun of as a kid for having a raspy voice. So
Ah.
I worked really hard to get myself to this point.
Who's laughing now?
Right? Who's laughing now? I win in your face.
Exactly. I know you also took like violin as a kid, which is obviously a beautiful sounding instrument, horrible to play. I took a few lessons myself. Are there any other instruments you play or any other areas of music production that you're interested in?
I guess you could consider me a multi-instrumentalist, although I don't excel at those instruments per se. I excel at guitar, but I was never great at violin. I taught myself how to play piano when I was a little kid. I play a little bit of drums. I play a little piano. I know concepts and I understand concepts on piano and stuff. In fact, on this new record I've been working on, I'm playing bass for some of the tracks, so I play a little bass too. So
Nice.
yeah, I play a lot of different instruments. I dabble in a lot of different instruments, but I really focus my energy on guitar.
Yeah, well, that's obvious. We have to talk about the fact that Sir Mix-a-Lot, and I'm only gonna say this for our audience's sake, who wrote, sings "Baby Got Back." I don't want to reduce him to that
Yeah.
one song, but just for the sake of like, so people know who he is. He produced your first independent record. How did that happen? Because he is a huge star.
The way that I got linked up with Sir Mix-a-Lot was from I was playing a bunch of bars here in Seattle. So when I was first starting out, just playing music and trying to figure it out, I was playing a bunch of bars and clubs in Seattle, and we had entered this contest where we needed to get a bunch of votes. So I think we played something like I want to say 16 shows in 2 weeks or something like that. It was something crazy. And in all this chaos, he walked into this little dive bar in the University District over here in Seattle. Loved what I sounded like. Loved the band and everything, and then offered to produce our first independent record. So he produced my first indie record.
You must have made such an impact. Did he go there specifically to hear you, or just coincidental?
He went there specifically to hear me. I think he got wind of me through a friend of his, and it was like, yeah, you guys check this guy out. And then he walked into the bar and saw it, loved it, and the rest was history. And he's actually been like a big brother to me and a mentor ever since. So it's a guy I still call on, especially at this stage of my career where everything's kind of brand new again. And so I still call on him. He's a very, very wise individual, and has a lot of know-how and a lot of experience navigating through the music industry. So.
Very cool. So back then you went by Ayron Jones and The Way. So what happened to The Way? Because now it's just straight up Ayron Jones.
Yeah. So what happened to The Way was that so let me get started in the beginning. Ayron Jones and The Way was a concept I came up with. I want to say when we first started out back in like 2010, and it was a concept that I had come up with just like I was into all these 60s rock bands and three-piece rock bands. So there's Jimi Hendrix and the Experience, there's Eric Clapton with Cream, and Prince and the Revolution, Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble, Buddy Holly and the Crickets. So I was like, I need to be the guitar kid who has his own band. So it was Ayron Jones and The Way. So when I started that band, we started really seeing some success as an independent group, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the original members of that band quit in 2015 at the same time, which was terrible. I remember crying over this.
Oh.
It was so sad for me because we had just done so much. I mean, honestly, the day they quit was the same day we had shared a stage with like Slipknot and Lamb of God and a bunch of really great bands, man. So, but that was the day that they quit, and it kind of never really bounced back. It was never the same. So I decided just to go by my namesake. I mean, I found some members to come and replace those guys that had quit, my bassist and drummer that had quit. But it just never quite had the same feel. But on top of that, I feel like as the composer and the writer for all this music, I think the whole band feel kind of took away from all the work that I was really putting in. I think a lot of people thought that we sat down as a band and wrote these songs as opposed to me writing out all these parts and then bringing it to the instrumentalist to play these parts and me sing the music and do all that,
Right. So
So I changed the name to be Solo.
got it. So at the end of the day, it was 100% your vision and your sound anyway. So not to say not a huge loss, but a lesser loss given.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it though was like that I will say this, that in working with those guys, that define the sound. You know what I'm trying to say? Like it made it so that I knew exactly what I wanted to sound like moving forward. You know, because a lot of when you're coming up as an artist is hit or miss. You know, you're trying to figure out what your sound is, what your look is, what all these things is, and you go through these experiments of different looks and different feels, different sounds, and then you to figure out what you want. And so those guys definitely set the mode in terms of that. And I think I have them to thank in terms of helping me find my sounds. But I was doing a lot of work, and I think that it was just time for me to shine. You know.
That moment has arrived. But before we get to the signing and the label and all that, what was your role on the very talented Janelle Monáe's Wonderland album, and what was it about that experience that made you confident that music is what you wanted to do?
Sure thing, yeah. So the thing about working with Janelle Monáe's Wonderland, let me clarify first. So I wasn't necessarily on an album, but I did get a chance to tour with her a few times, along with a band that was under her label. But that was probably the most inspirational thing I could have done for myself. I mean, I went down to Atlanta to work with this group called Deep Cotton, which is a punk group under her label, which is comprised of Nate Wonder and Chuck Lightning, who are her producers and some of the creative minds behind her work. That experience, I mean, I went from being just like a bar player, playing for 3 hours in a corner bar and playing at the cafes and stuff, to all of a sudden my first tour being with one of the hottest new artists of that time. And it shaped everything for me. I mean, I remember arriving in Atlanta and seeing like how encompassed in their art they were. They were drenched in it. Everything was black and white, and the floors, the carpets were made out of this grass-like astroturf, and there was clocks over the walls, and it for the first time, it opened my eyes up to what it meant to really be an artist. That stuck with me for the rest of the time, and just to see Janelle do what she did in around her house and her label, it was just amazing. I mean, she was a boss, and she kind of definitely commanded that respect. But more than anything, you could just see how creative she was and talented she was, and what I needed to do to get there. So I took that inspiration from Janelle and took that and applied it to my own work.
Very cool. Very cool. So you are label mates with Josh Katz and Bad Flower. We love those guys around here. How did you end up getting signed to Big Machine / John Varvatos Records?
So the way that I ended up getting signed to Big Machine Varvatos Records was through my amazing management over at Indigoot. I have to give a shout out to Bill McGathy over there, and Michael Urato, Allison Shepard, and the whole crew over there. They were the ones that kind of set up the meeting with those guys. I should back up actually though. So what happened was that I had just finished up a few recordings for the new record, and I turned it in to my manager. He had finally played it for his boss, the big guy, Bill McGathy, and he freaked, man. They loved it. And shortly after that, I booked a show here. I had a show here in Seattle. It was crazy. It was sold out. And Bill had told me that John Varvatos was interested in checking me out. So John had walked into the show ironically, next to Duff McKagan of all people.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, so he walks in with Duff McKagan side by side. And I've done some work with Duff, so like I'm familiar. Me and him are acquainted with each other, and I was shocked to see him there. So he walks in with Duff McKagan and Julian Raymond, who works at the label. And they saw the show firsthand live and loved it. Then they decided they wanted Scott Borchetta to see it. So they flew me out to Nashville, and we played for Scott, and then the rest was history, So I'm just as shocked as you are. I mean, it happened. I can't even tell you how fast it like it was a blur, Like I had no idea. I mean, I'm just some kid from Seattle just kind of make his way up, and all of a sudden now I'm in the company of some of the biggest names in rock and roll history and the most influential names in rock and roll history. And now all of a sudden I'm here today.
Shout out to Ad Rock at Indigoot. He's a great guy, since we're talking about the Indigoot crew. Was that intimidating though, like knowing that John Varvatos, like he could make or break or not break, but he could definitely make a career if he wanted to? Was that like intimidating for you, or you're cool as a cucumber on stage no matter what?
So when it comes to John at the show and being intimidated by that, I not at all. As an independent artist, I had done so much for myself and put myself in such crazy situations. I mean, I've opened for B.B. King. I've opened for Guns N' Roses. I'd gone on tour with Theory of a Dead Man. I worked alongside Run DMC, Public Enemy, and Rakim. And so those were tense moments. So at the point in which, now the record executives are starting to walk into the shows, I was just, it had been the natural flow of things, so I wasn't really intimidated by that. And I think you were right, though, with that make or break comment, because you only get one shot to really make an impression on the labels.
Yeah.
And I tell you this, honest and truly, you only get one big shot, and so you better make it your best shot,
Obviously, you shot it. You shot it right.
Got it!
Yeah, that was a 3-pointer. So, no, I know nothing about sports. Like, it's like the one thing, or a touchdown. That's the extent of my. Anyway, we move on.
I played ultimate frisbee.
There you go. Talk to us about. So the new song is called "Take Me Away," right? Talk to us about the inspiration behind the track.
Yeah. So the inspiration behind "Take Me Away," it came from my desire to want to see more in the world through my music, but also, having grown up with the background I had, dealing with feelings of abandonment and all that, those kind of emotions due to you as an adult and in your relationships and the people and also just being a black man in America and kind of figuring out what that means for myself, So there's a lot to it. But "Take Me Away" was really about how I was going to use my music to take me out of whatever turmoil or whatever beginnings I had, and that, no matter where I came from or what kind of beginnings I had, I knew that those things didn't have to define me. So "Take Me Away" was kind of my defining moment,
I love that. As you mentioned, you've played alongside such a wide variety of people, from Run DMC to Theory of a Dead Man. Are we going to be hearing that kind of variety in the upcoming album? So is this this is your first major label debut album, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so sound-wise, are we dipping our toe into like kind of different genres, or what can we expect?
I don't want to expose too much for the new album, but I will say that I think that people will be pleasantly surprised. Since I was a little kid, I had the dream of creating this rock and roll music that was genreless, that touched on many different things, without, for lack of a better word, bastardizing other genre sounds, right? Like I don't want to play a rock version of hip hop that's going to make hip hop look bad, So I've tried to take little pieces of all these genres and put them together in this style of music I play, And so you'll definitely hear little tidbits of that. You'll see why, I've been chosen to open for such a wide variety of different acts and how they fit in together, So definitely you'll get a peek of that.
What stage is the album in? And knowing that it's your first introduction to many outside of Seattle, I know you're very well known in Seattle, but what's your number one priority? What are you laser focused on in terms of making it sound right or whatever?
My laser focus has been to make sure that sound that you see when we play live is coming through your speakers and heavy, and also like bass, like bass, man, bass. I grew up in an inner city neighborhood in Seattle called the Central District, and so I was surrounded by hip hop and all sorts of different kind of music that were influential to the world, and that came from inner city neighborhoods such as jazz and blues and hip hop and soul and rock, and so for me, in terms of the low end, I need that bass sound. I need that thumping hip hop, rattle your speakers bass. So that's a big thing for me as well. And
is the record done, or are you still working on it?
We're close. It's not quite done yet, but we're close. We've got a few more loose ends to tie up, a few more songs to get recorded, but we're getting there.
Are you kind of worried? And I mean, I know from the point where it's done, there's still marketing and a bunch of other crap before it gets released. But are you worried about coronavirus maybe impacting the release?
No, I what's funny is I see things from a pretty interesting perspective. I kind of follow my life through something called the 7 Hermetic Principles. Have you ever heard of those?
What is it?
The 7 Hermetic Principles. Let me pull them up right now as I'm talking to you about this. But the 7 Hermetic Principles are basically the laws of the universe, and it kind of dictates how the universe vibration works in the universe, and how things kind of ebb and they flow and they go up and they go down, but they're all one thing, Mm-hmm. So for me, I look at the coronavirus as actually being helpful to my cause, just on the simple fact that, as of right now, people can't get outside. They're looking for new music, and I think this sound that I've been able to help produce alongside, a myriad of musicians and great artists on this record. I think that it's going to excite people. I think it's going to get people a chance to, refresh their ears a little bit. And then when this is all over, I think it's just gonna come back to cascade down, and I think it's gonna open up, and it's really gonna help people. People are really gonna be able to come out and see shows, and I think right now is a time to build a bunch of tension, and up to that moment. So I think the release of this music is that,
Right. It's that pent up demand. And if you got that album at the right point and you're able to get out there and play it, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
This will be our last question.
Sure.
What's the role of music in 2020? Like we just talked about coronavirus, right? Today, 44 million people have applied for unemployment. Like it raises 1 million every week. The Black Lives Matter movement, so on and so forth. A musician's responsibility to do what, if anything, with their music in this time? Does it change the music? Do you just do what you do? How do you, big picture, visualize that?
That's a good question. I think the role of an artist and a musician in this time period is to heal. To be honest with you, it's to heal, man. It's to heal. It's to tell your story. It's to speak out for the people around you. It's to help influence change. These are the responsibilities of an artist, I think, in this time period, and just do the best you can. I mean, obviously, you're going to write about the reflections you see, when you're in the world right now with the Black Lives Matter movement going on and the coronavirus and all those things. Those things are going to be talked about. But more than anything, right now, people need a voice, and of all backgrounds, just need a voice right now. And we need a lot of healing and mending in the world right now. And that's, I think, where rock and roll has always played its strongest strength was right there in the civil rights movement of the 50s and the 60s during Vietnam. And we're kind of living in that same time now. So I think now's a best time as any for rock and roll to kind of make a comeback and just bring some sort of some peace back to the world. You know what I mean? I think that goes for all of us.
I'm all about the peace. Love it. Ayron Jones, looking forward to hearing so much more from you for many, many years to come. You have a home here on Loudwire Nights, and thank you again for your time.
Appreciate it.